Not all loneliness is harmless. Some people retreat into shadows so deep they reshape reality itself around them. Loneliness is often mistaken for emptiness, a void to be feared and experienced, to be hurried past with distractions or the company of others. Yet the empath who embraces solitude does not experience loneliness in this way. To them, it is not a gap, but a landscape, a vast and silent expanse that reveals truths others never see. Within this solitude, they confront themselves with an honesty the world seldom demands. Most people live their lives looking outward, seeking validation, reassurance, and connection, never pausing to meet the shadows that dwell within. But the empath alone faces these shadows directly, stripping away illusions and faces the raw patterns of human nature as they emerge from the unconscious mind. In the quiet of isolation, an empath begins to notice subtleties that others cannot. They perceive the tremor of fear beneath a smile, the hesitation behind confident words, the hidden motives behind gestures. Loneliness becomes a lens, magnifying the invisible threads that bind people, exposing the unspoken rules and suppressed desires that govern behavior. This clarity is unsettling because it reveals the discrepancy between appearances and reality, forcing the empath to confront a truth many prefer to ignore. People are rarely what they seem, and society is rarely what it appears to be. The power of this awareness grows in solitude. Without the constant noise of companionship, without the dilution of others' perspective, the empath develops a refined perception of emotional landscapes. Every encounter, every observation becomes data. Every subtle shift in tone, posture, or expression is cataloged and understood, revealing patterns that escape even the most socially connected minds. While others depend on dialogue, the empath depends on introspection and observation, using solitude as a laboratory to dissect the intricacies of human behavior. This hidden depth of loneliness is also a confrontation with the self. In isolation, there is no escape from the inner world, no distraction from the swirling currents of thought and emotion. The empath who endures this solitude must navigate their own psyche with courage, confronting insecurity, contradictions, and fears that are often buried beneath the surface of social existence. This confrontation is not comfortable, it is a crucible. Yet it is precisely this struggle that forges a mind capable of extraordinary insight. Whereas social engagement often reinforces illusions, isolation strips them away, leaving only the essential truth of experience. The empath alone also gains an intimate understanding of human fragility by observing others from a distance and reflecting upon their own emotional reaction. They see the subtle vulnerabilities that most people spend a lifetime hiding. They begin to understand the ways in which trust can be exploited, intentions can be manipulated, and emotions can be weaponized. Loneliness cultivates not only empathy, but also discernment, the ability to detect sincerity, deceit, and hidden motive with a precision that escapes those immersed in social familiarity. Yet there is a paradox in this hidden depth. While solitude grants extraordinary insight, it also magnifies the intensity of feeling. The empath experiences the full spectrum of human emotion internally, unbuffered by the distractions of social life. Joy, sorrow, anger, and fear are all amplified, experienced with a vividness that can be overwhelming. This intensity teaches resilience, but it also demands careful navigation. For the mind left unchecked in such depths can drift toward obsession or despair. It is a delicate balance, walking between heightened awareness and emotional overload, yet it is a balance that cultivates profound understanding. Moreover, the hidden depths of loneliness reveal the structure of society itself. The empath begins to notice the subtle hierarchies, unspoken rules, and invisible pressures that shape human interaction. They observe how conformity is enforced, how influence is wielded, and how subtle emotional currents govern decisions on both small and large scales. In solitude, one can perceive the invisible architecture of relationships and social systems, the intricate lattice of power, desire, and fear that guides the collective mind. While most people are swept along these currents unconsciously, The empath who dwells in isolation sees the forces at work with a clarity that is both illuminating and unsettling. This awareness does not always translate into action. The empath may choose silence, observing quietly, acting sparingly, or withdrawing completely from the mechanisms of social influence. Yet, even in apparent passivity, their understanding gives them a form of power that is subtle but formidable. To comprehend without being seen, to perceive without being perceived, is a rare skill. In this quiet mastery, the empath navigates the world with the knowledge that solitude has given them a vantage point unavailable to those entangled in constant social engagement. In the hidden depths of loneliness, there is also a confrontation with impermanence and mortality. The empath experiences the fleeting nature of relationships, the fragility of trust, and the inevitability of separation with acute awareness. These realizations, far from breeding despair, cultivate a profound respect for the fleeting moment of connection that do occur, and a measured detachment from those that are illusory or transient. It is an understanding of life stripped to its essentials. The ebb and flow of emotion, the transient nature of human attachment, and the enduring presence of the inner self as the only constant witness to all experience. Those who feel everything and share nothing can wield more influence than armies without anyone realizing it. Some people move through life feeling lightly, brushing past the world like water over stone. Others, however, feel everything, and in their sensitivity lies a profound, often hidden power. For empaths who absorb emotion deeply, the world is not merely a backdrop of events, it is a constantly shifting web of unseen forces, a spectrum of subtle energies that can be read, interpreted, and understood if one has the patience and discipline to notice. Emotional absorption is not passive, it is active, transformative, and often dangerous, because it grants a capacity to perceive and influence the currents of human experience that most will never recognize. To absorb emotion is to step into a space between perception and reality, where feelings act as signals, warnings, and insights all at once. The empath feels not only their own emotional landscape, but also the hidden currents around them. The laughter that seems genuine, the smile that masks contempt, the casual remark, loaded with anxiety, all of these are visible to them with startling clarity. In a single encounter, the empath registers the weight of unspoken thoughts, the tremor of suppressed feelings, and the patterns that emerge beneath the surface of conscious awareness. This power, honed in solitude, allows them to navigate the emotional world with precision, identifying intentions and predicting outcomes that others overlook. The mechanism of absorption is subtle but relentless. Unlike casual observation, which depends on attention and memory, emotional absorption works continuously. The empath's mind functions like a mirror and a filter, simultaneously reflecting the feelings they encounter while distilling them into comprehension. Every interaction becomes a lesson, every observation a clue. Their sensitivity does not diminish over time, rather, it accumulates. The collective weight of absorbed emotion can become almost tangible, forming a deep reservoir of insight from which they draw understanding and strategy. In this way, the empath transforms what most see as vulnerability into a form of invisible strength. Yet the power of absorption carries a dual edge. The more deeply emotions are felt, the more one risks being consumed by them. For the empath who has no social buffer, every intensity, joy, grief, fear, desire is magnified. When unchecked, this influx can overwhelm, fragmenting thought, clouding judgment, or driving the mind toward obsession. But those who master the art of absorption learn to sift through the torrent of feeling, separating signal from noise, understanding which emotions are their own and which belong to the external world. This discernment is not learned through instruction, but through rigorous engagement with solitude, reflection, and the willingness to confront the complexity of others without flinching. The empath who absorbs emotions fully becomes a quiet observer of human nature. They notice the small shifts in energy that precede action, the hesitation in a glance, the tightening of posture before a decision is made. They recognize patterns of manipulation, strategies of influence, and the hidden motivations that govern human interaction. This is why emotional absorption is not merely a sensitivity, it is a form of intelligence. It allows the empath to anticipate reactions, influence outcomes subtly, and navigate relationships with a clarity few ever achieve. There is also a profound moral dimension to this ability. Absorbing the emotions of others fosters deep empathy, the capacity to understand suffering, joy, and complexity without the distortions of judgment. At the same time, it creates responsibility. For every influence felt, there is potential to intervene, to shape, or to manipulate. The empath is faced with a constant choice to act consciously or to remain silent, to honor the autonomy of those whose emotions they perceive, or to exploit the insights they gain. This ethical tension defines much of the internal life of the emotionally absorbing empath, shaping their character and subtle dynamics they create in the world. The intensity of emotional absorption also grants self-awareness unlike any other. By sensing the echoes of others' feelings within themselves, empaths confront the projections, shadows, and unacknowledged desires that dwell within. They learn to distinguish their own impulses from the reflections of the collective psyche, a skill that sharpens judgment and cultivates emotional resilience. This is not a passive recognition of feelings. It is an active engagement with the invisible forces that move people. A mastery of nuance that transforms perception into understanding and understanding into subtle influence. Through emotional absorption, the empath discovers that the world is less a sequence of isolated events and more a continuous flow of interconnected effective energy. Every interaction, no matter how fleeting, carries information, and the mind trained in perception begins to recognize the currents before they manifest in speech or action. This is a kind of power invisible to those who live superficially, who navigate life with distraction, denial, or habitual indifference. To absorb emotion fully is to see the hidden architecture of human behavior, to understand the undercurrent that guide choices, and to perceive the silent forces shaping every social interaction. In this deep engagement with feeling, empaths gain not only awareness, but strategy. They understand when to act and when to observe, when to intervene and when to remain still. They become acutely aware of vulnerability and strength, opportunity and risk, trust and deceit. The empath's world is rich with information, more layered and textured than the everyday perception of most people. Their power does not lie in domination, but in understanding and intimate comprehension of the human psyche that allows them to move through life with precision, insight, and an influence that is often invisible but profoundly real. Empaths, without friends, quietly observe, analyze, and manipulate social currents, turning invisible insights into invisible power. Some of the most potent forces in life are not the loud, the obvious, or the celebrated. They are quiet, subtle, and almost invisible. The empath who keeps no friends belongs to this category, an observer of human behavior, a strategist who moves through the world with awareness that borders on the preternatural. While others seek validation, connection, or recognition, the silent architect of chaos relies on observation, intuition, and the careful accumulation of knowledge. They are attuned to the rhythms of emotion, the subtle shifts in energy, and the hidden structures that shape human interaction. Their power lies not in force, but in perception, the ability to anticipate and influence without the world ever realizing it. These individuals operate in the margins, often unnoticed and underestimated. Society rewards visibility, noise, and assertiveness, while overlooking the quiet minds who study patterns without interference. But it is these observers who understand the machinery of relationships, the architecture of influence, and the dynamics that govern social cohesion and conflict. In solitude, the empath cultivates an acute awareness of how emotions ripple through groups, how authority is enacted subtly, and how power is distributed unconsciously among those who think themselves free. Every interaction becomes an experiment, every observation a lesson, and every relationship a source of insight into the invisible structures that govern behavior. The silent architect's approach is methodical. They do not seek to dominate openly. Instead, they influence indirectly, shaping outcomes through subtle gestures, well-timed words, or strategic inaction. They recognize that chaos is rarely created by confrontation, but by understanding the weak points in systems, relationships, and assumptions. With this awareness, they can guide events, decisions, and perceptions in ways that appear natural, inevitable, or self-directed to those involved. In this manner, the empath, without friends, wields a quiet form of power, one that is invisible yet profound, unnoticed yet deeply effective. Their mastery of observation is matched only by their understanding of human motivation. By absorbing emotion and perceiving intention, the empath learns to anticipate behavior before it manifests. They see patterns where others see randomness, detect tension where others see harmony, and perceive consequences before they unfold. This predictive capability allows them to intervene or choose not to intervene with precision. The outcomes of their actions, even when subtle, can ripple outward, creating shifts in dynamics, alliances, and understanding that others attribute to chance or coincidence. Paradoxically, their isolation is what amplifies their influence, free from the obligations, distractions, and compromises of friendship. The silent architect of chaos has clarity of mind and freedom of action. They are not bound by expectation or social conformity. This detachment enables them to act strategically, to remain patient while others react impulsively, and to gather intelligence without bias. In observing the intricate web of human behavior, they develop a map of social landscapes invisible to the casual participant, and it is from this vantage point that they guide, anticipate, and subtly reshape outcomes. The silent architect of chaos also understands timing. Influence is rarely effective without patience. By waiting, observing, and allowing situations to develop naturally, they leverage the momentum of human emotion and social structures. A carefully chosen word, a small gesture, or a timely absence can produce results far beyond overt action. The empath who moves through solitude has the advantage of seeing the entire structure before intervening, understanding the interplay of forces, and recognizing the precise moment when minimal effort yields maximum effect. This understanding does not require malice. The architect's power is not necessarily destructive. It is comprehension applied with discernment. Yet in the absence of ethical restraint, the potential for chaos is undeniable. When someone so deeply attuned to emotional currents chooses to manipulate, to exploit, or to bend situations to their will, the effects are profound because they are invisible. Their influence spreads quietly, shaping opinions, decisions, and relationships before anyone realizes they are being guided. What appears to be chance, coincidence, or the natural course of events may in fact be the precise application of insight honed in solitude. Furthermore, the silent architect of chaos learns to manage their own inner turbulence. In absorbing the emotions of others, in perceiving motives and vulnerabilities, they risk being overwhelmed by intensity. Mastery requires the discipline to observe without being consumed, to feel without being incapacitated, and to act without attachment. Through this practice, the empath not only understands the chaos around them, but navigates it skillfully, remaining balanced while wielding insight that can alter the course of events for countless lives. They inhabit a paradoxical space, invisible yet omniscient in the domains they choose to study, detached yet deeply connected to the underlying emotional currents of humanity. This position allows them to anticipate, influence, and navigate with a precision that few can comprehend. They are architects not of buildings or structures, but of situations, emotions, and relationships, shaping reality through perception, strategy, and understanding in ways that remain hidden to the world at large. Isolation doesn't weaken them, it sharpens instincts, hones perception, and fuels strategies the world never sees coming. Isolation is often portrayed as a weakness, a state of deprivation, or a condition to escape. Society fears it, labeling those who choose solitude as lonely, antisocial, or incomplete. Yet the empath who embraces isolation experiences something entirely different. To them, solitude is not emptiness but a crucible, a space where perception sharpens, instincts refine, and the subtle current of human behavior become visible in ways unavailable to those who are constantly surrounded by noise and distraction. But within this power lies danger, masked and often unnoticed, because isolation does not merely quiet the world, it intensifies the mind and magnifies the self. The empath who isolates themselves without friends gains clarity but also becomes more vulnerable to the distortions of their own perception. Surrounded only by their inner thoughts, they confront the shadow aspects of their psyche, the fears, obsessions, and suppressed impulses that most people avoid or project outward. Left unchecked, these inner currents can twist understanding, create a lens of hyper-awareness that distorts rather than illuminates. The mind becomes an echo chamber, reflecting the amplified emotions of both self and others absorbed through observation, turning insight into anxiety, intuition into suspicion, and awareness into obsession. Yet isolation is seductive. It creates the illusion of control. The empath believes that by withdrawing, they can observe the world safely, shielded from manipulation, disappointment, and interference. And in some ways, this is true. Solitude allows for unparalleled focus, a freedom to explore thought without distraction, a heightened attunement to the emotional undercurrents of those around them. But it also masks a dangerous truth. The longer the mind operates without social calibration, the greater the risk of misinterpreting the behaviors, intentions, and emotions of others. Perception without interaction can turn power into paranoia, observation into judgment, and insight into unintended manipulation. The masked danger of isolation also lies in the amplification of sensitivity. Without friends, companions to moderate emotional intake, the empath absorbs freely, allowing feelings joy, grief, anger, fear to swell unchecked. This emotional resonance strengthens their understanding of human nature. But it can also produce a volatility invisible to outsiders. An empath may react to subtle shifts in energy that others dismiss, create decisions or behaviors that seem irrational, erratic, or unrelatable. What is adaptive in moderation becomes extreme in seclusion, and the very power they cultivate may turn inward, creating tension between self-perception and the perception of the world outside. Isolation also sharpens strategic thinking. Freed from the need to appease, to conform, or to entertain others, the empath can study behavior, anticipate action, and calculate outcomes with unparalleled clarity. They become architects of subtle influence, moving through social landscapes invisibly while understanding the emotional architecture of relationships, hierarchies, and networks. But this same skill, when untempered by social engagement, can create a disconnection between empathy and application. The mind may become so attuned to observing that it forgets to participate, so skilled in perception that it loses sight of practical morality, so focused on the currents of influence that it underestimates the consequences of inaction. Another danger emerges in the distortion of identity. Without mirrors in the form of friends, colleagues, or confidence, the empath relies entirely on internal reflection. While this deep self-examination cultivates insight, it can also exaggerate self-importance, inflating the significance of thoughts, observations, or perceived influence. The empath may begin to see patterns where none exist, motives that are projections of their own understanding, or dangers that exist only in the mind sharpened by isolation. The very power of solitude, the capacity to see what others overlook, can produce illusions of control, creating a hidden tension between reality and perception. The empath who isolates also experiences a paradoxical relationship with human connection. While their solitude increases sensitivity, it simultaneously creates distance. Emotional resonance becomes intense but selective, creating the ability to read others without reciprocating fully. This detachment may appear as mastery, but it carries the risk of alienation, reinforcing the very isolation that magnifies danger. The empath learns to manipulate, influence, and anticipate with precision, yet these abilities exist within A context of minimal external feedback, heightening the potential for misjudgment or unseen consequences. In addition, isolation heightens the empath's awareness of impermanence and unpredictability in relationships. They witness the fleeting nature of trust, the fragility of alliances, and the instability of human intentions with acute perception. This insight sharpens judgment, but can also create cynicism, a protective armor that distances them further from genuine connection. The empath's solitude becomes both a shield and a trap, granting power while simultaneously nurturing. Vulnerability, creating a tension between internal mastery and external uncertainty. Ultimately, the masked danger of isolation lies in its dual nature. It cultivates profound understanding, sharpened perception, and quiet influence, while simultaneously amplifying internal distortions, magnifying emotional intensity and distancing the empath from the grounding reality of reciprocal connection. It is a state of paradox, a crucible where insight and obsession, mastery and misjudgment coexist in delicate tension, shaping a mind that is both potent and perilous without connection. Deep sensitivity fractures, yet when harnessed, it becomes a force capable of bending society to its unseen will. Every empath, particularly those who live in isolation, faces a choice that is both subtle and profound: to integrate the wealth of their emotional and psychological insight into a cohesive sense of self, or to fragment under the weight of the very perception that gives them power. Integration does not come automatically. It is a process, a continuous negotiation between sensitivity, observation, and engagement with the world. Fragmentation, by contrast, arises when awareness exceeds understanding, when the capacity to absorb and interpret emotion overwhelms the individual, creating internal dissonance that ripples outward in unpredictable ways. The line between these two states is fine, often invisible, yet it defines the trajectory of a life spent in intense emotional awareness. Integration begins with self-recognition. The empath must identify which of the feelings and patterns they perceive belong to them, and which belong to the external world. Without this discernment, emotional absorption becomes a corrosive force, blurring boundaries and creating confusion. The process requires disciplined reflection, a deliberate examination of external stimuli, and the ability to distinguish between influence and projection. Integration is not mere containment. It is an active shaping of perception, a conscious construction of understanding from the raw materials of experience, observation, and intuition. Fragmentation, by contrast, is a subtle erosion of coherence. The empath who fails to integrate may find their internal world in constant turbulence, by every external emotion overwhelmed by the sheer volume of insight absorbed from others. Patterns that appear clear in isolation may seem contradictory in practice, and the pressure to navigate emotional landscapes without a stabilizing framework can produce indecision, internal conflict, and emotional exhaustion. Fragmentation is rarely dramatic in appearance. It creeps quietly, undermining confidence, skewing judgment, and diminishing the ability to act decisively. Over time, it erodes the very power the empath seeks to cultivate. The consequence of integration extend beyond the self. An empath who achieves cohesion can move through the world with a precision that seems almost uncanny. Their decisions are informed not only by reason, but by a nuanced understanding of emotional currents. They anticipate outcomes with foresight, influence interactions subtly, and maintain stability under conditions that would overwhelm others. Integration allows for strategic action, moral clarity, and resilience, creating a capacity to navigate complex social landscapes while retaining inner equilibrium. Fragmentation, however, is contagious. An empath, unbalanced by the emotions of others, can project instability outward, affecting those around them without conscious intent. Misinterpretations, heightened sensitivity, and reactive behavior may create conflict, confusion, or unintended manipulation. The empath becomes both observer and participant in chaos, unable to distinguish between the currents they absorb and the currents they create. In this way, the internal struggle mirrors external effects, and the cost of fragmentation is measured not only in personal suffering but in the subtle disruptions left in its wake. Integration requires conscious cultivation of boundaries. The empath must learn when to absorb and when to release, when to engage and when to withdraw. Emotional intelligence alone is insufficient without the structure to process and apply it. Solitude, observation, and introspection are tools, but without synthesis. They can magnify vulnerability rather than enhance mastery. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters that allow perception to operate without overwhelming that channel. Sensitivity into insight, and that transform absorption into understanding rather than distortion. Fragmentation often occurs when boundaries are ignored or misunderstood. Over-identification with absorbed emotions can create a sense of being perpetually pulled in multiple directions, where external realities and internal reflections collide with intensity. The empath may struggle to differentiate self from other, projection from perception, or influence from action. This condition amplifies isolation even further, as the mind becomes both home and battlefield, and the capacity to engage effectively with the world diminishes under the weight of unprocessed experience. Integration is further strengthened through connection, paradoxically. While isolation can sharpen perception, meaningful interaction allows the empath to calibrate insights against reality, providing feedback that stabilizes internal understanding. Carefully chosen relationships act as mirrors, confirming or challenging perception, helping to refine judgment, and grounding the empath in both empathy and discernment. Fragmentation often results from neglecting this calibration, allowing untested interpretations to accumulate unchecked. Ultimately, the path of the empath is defined by this delicate equilibrium. Integration transforms emotional absorption into wisdom, observation into clarity, and solitude into strategic mastery. Fragmentation converts insight into confusion, perception into distortion, and isolation into silent turmoil. The empath who navigates these extremes must constantly balance the weight of emotion, the depth of observation, and the pull of human connection, shaping a self that is coherent, resilient, and capable of profound influence.